very special book we are discussing, and we have special uh, friends who are going to be the anchor of today's book, The God of Small Things. The Margao Book Club was started in March 2019, and we worked very hard discussing a book a month till December 2019. After the shutdown, after COVID in March, we went slack a little while till Rahul and some other members suggested that we should go online. And I think this has been a wonderful suggestion, and we haven't looked back. So now we have discussed several books online, and some of the discussions have been highly appreciated, both by friends, by scholars, because they added value to the book, because local people on which society books were written were being discussed. So today we go to Kerala and discuss The God of Small Things. I have a little bad news. Arundhati may not be able to join us, but if she can, she will. So we'll have to have a little surprise for the last half an hour. Yeah. Thank you very much. Please start the discussion. And Teresa and Margarita, please introduce yourselves, because we would benefit very much from the kind of work you've been doing, the kind of research, and especially Teresa, because she has translated the book, The God of Small Things, into Portuguese. So she kind of took God of Small Things to Portugal. And Margarita has done research on Arundhati Roy's work. So I'm sure we'll take home a lot of special points from this discussion. And of course, all of us will contribute in our own way to the discussion of the book.
Start by introducing myself, and then
yes, then it goes round.
Because we're sort of the newcomers here. Yeah. So my name is Teresa Casal, and first of all, Savia, thank you so much for thinking of us to join in this discussion. I'm very much looking forward to learning from what all of you have to say about this wonderful novel. And the invitation itself was a perfect excuse for me to go back to The God of Small Things and reread it, which I hadn't done in some years, because as you said, it was my privilege to translate The God of Small Things. That was 23 years ago. So it was published in Portugal 22 years ago. But the process of translation took several months, in the middle of which I moved from Portugal to Ireland, where I was then teaching Portuguese at the service of Instituto Camões. And a little bit of an anecdote: when the publisher commissioned me to translate The God of Small Things, the novel had not yet been shortlisted for the Booker Prize. And I had done some translations, but I had never translated the whole novel yet. So I think the publisher they were a little bit concerned when the novel went on to be shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and then went on to win the Booker Prize. And they had kind of a neophyte translator in Portugal. So when I finally sent the translation in a floppy disk, because those were the days, they very anxiously started to read it, and then I understood that they were happy enough with the translation when they called me and asked if I would take a second commission. So, but there was a little bit of trepidation about the whole thing. I have to say that it was my first book-length translation. It remains the most challenging, but also the most enjoyable one. So it was difficult, but it brought me great pleasure, because it required a lot of creativity on the part of the translator as well. We can talk a bit about that later. But anyway, so apart from that, I teach at the University of Lisbon, in Irish Studies, Literary Translation and Medical Humanities, and that's it. So maybe I would invite Margarita to introduce herself, and then we'll have everybody introducing themselves.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Like Teresa, I would like to thank all the members of the Margao Book Club for inviting us to join in this session, and especially to my friend Savia Viegas, who I admire not only as an artist, painter and writer, but also on a more personal level, since I had the pleasure of spending some time with Savia and Anoop, not only here in Lisbon in 2016, was it, Savia?
Yes, yes.
But also at your home.
18.
Sorry?
2018. 18. 2017, I was in Portugal. We met
Okay,
then.
that's it.
Yeah,
Yes, that's
yeah.
right. 2017 in Portugal and
18.
2018 when I
18.
was in Goa.
Yeah.
And where you so generously hosted Anna and me. It was a wonderful stay that we had. And I've watched some of the videos, parts of the videos that from previous session. I think this is a wonderful project that you have. I also remember attending a cinema session at your house.
Yes.
I don't know, is this the same group?
Yeah, no, it's a different
different group. Okay,
yeah,
different
yeah.
members. Okay, and I thought that was an interesting project that you had as well.
That
I
is
remember
Anoop's
that.
project.
And finally, it's also a pleasure to be here with my friend and colleague and group coordinator, Teresa Casal, a researcher and a woman that I admire very much. And a translator who had the courage to work on this book and translate it into Portuguese, which I think was quite an endeavor. I work in distance learning, so I'm a teacher at the Portuguese online university. I work in English language and culture. I teach different subjects, but everything is online. So I'm used to this. And I'm also a researcher at the University of Lisbon, the Center for English Studies, with the group that Teresa coordinates. And I am, to put it in a very simple way, I'm a big fan of this novel, okay? And the author. So I look forward to, I don't want to be academic at all. I want to talk about it from also a personal level and my personal experience of the novel. And I look forward to hearing everyone on the group. Thank you.
I think we should go in for a quick round of discussions now, Rahul.
Yeah, so who would like to start? Stanley, would you like to start, please?
Yeah, I don't know how qualified I am to really start this discussion. Am I heard?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes,
Yeah?
yes.
Okay. As I said, I'm not really sure about my qualifications to start the discussion, but basically, like Teresa Casal and Margarita, I'm a very huge fan of Arundhati Roy. And I've written a review of this book recently I published it in the Facebook because I had not done it earlier. So the main point that I raised in that review, if I can be allowed to refer to that, is everywhere you go and where you talk to anybody who has read the book, the first thing they talk about is the incestuous relationship between the brother and sister. So-called incestuous. My personal view is it's not incestuous at all. There is no real, it's not a brother and sister having that kind of a relationship. It is only a symbolic thing which she brings out in her book, saying that there were two zygotic twins who were on a kind of, they went around the world looking for satisfaction, looking for peace, looking for love. And when they come back, they come back as two parts of one soul. And that's how that communion comes together in such a huge satisfaction for both the siblings. Why I say this particularly is because all through the book she keeps on mentioning that they are not really two separate beings. All the time there are several references I could bring out where she is not talking about two separate beings at all. She talks about a place where Rahel knows that Esther had a problem with that lemon drink man. She knows, she hasn't seen it, but she knows what is happening, what has happened to him. This is one example. Another example is where towards the end, where Rahel, where Esther himself says that before Rahel came back to his life, his mind was absolutely cool, calm, quiet, absolutely nothing to disturb him. But the moment she comes in, a train load of activities comes in. Sounds of train, sounds of the surroundings, the light that you get when you sit at the window of a cabin, all that he feels that with him with her presence that has come into his life. Fine. So that is my basic take on the book, that it is not something that climaxes into a relationship of incest, but a climax of two half souls meeting together and making a whole. That is my basic reading of the book. I think we could probably have a discussion on that first.
What do other people feel about this? So it's striking that, Stanley, that you mentioned that is the most or one of the most prominent things that people register about the book, that it has to do with this incestuous relationship between the twins, which actually happens only right at the end of the novel. And as you say, it can be literal or symbolic or both. And I suppose a novel that is as rich and dense as this one is will resonate differently, different readers, and will address different concerns, sensibilities. So different people are going to pick on different things, I suppose. So, and I don't know if Margarita wants to say anything, or anybody else for that matter, because.
Yes, it would be interesting to hear what other members of the group have to say on Esther and Rahel's relationship, or maybe the incest, or there's other. This is something that I relate to I associate with one of the themes in this novel, which is the idea of transgression. And it's not only in Esther and Rahel's involvement, but there's also other aspects where this is brought up in the novel. But I don't know, maybe we can see what other members of the group have to say on this topic.
All find very striking about the novel, and because of course there's this transgression as well as the Amor-Velusa relationship. And the place for love in a world with very strict, rigid rules and law.
Yes. Yeah, there's a I don't know if I can find it right now, but I can look for it. There's a wonderful quote from the novel on that, on breaking the rules, the laws of love.
Yeah, the laws of love
find
are
it.
very, very strict.
I have to look
The
for it.
novels
Whom to love, and how much and how.
That's it.
Yeah.
In my book, it's on page 31.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Perhaps Amu, Esther, and she were the worst transgressors, but it wasn't just them. It was the others too. They all broke the rules. They all crossed into forbidden territory, right?
Yes.
They all tampered with the laws that lay down who should be loved and how.
laid out in terms of the twins, Amu and Velutha, baby Kochama and Father Mulligan, which is a relationship that cannot materialize, despite the fact that he lives Catholicism and embraces another religion, and she doesn't come into it either. Yeah, it's very much central to the novel as part
Yes.
of rules which are very, very strict. And also about, I suppose, an issue that vulnerability. These rules are very strict, very violent when applied in an extremely rigid way, and fail to account for our basic sameness as well, because it's in the chapter The History House, where there's the reference to the fact that not even our fundamental biological sameness is acknowledged. And so it seems to be a world where there is very little room for love, because it is so fiercely conditioned by very, very strict rules. Now, this is not to invalidate the issue of incest, because incest is one of the oldest taboos everywhere, so across cultures and all that. But it's just that in this particular novel, it's set alongside a number of other transgressions, as Margarita was saying. So I don't know if other readers, because we're all here as readers, basically, and enthusiastic readers of the novel would like to say.
Even if you take Amu's relationships, like if you take the three of them, that is Kochama, Amu. Amu's first marriage is with a boy from North India. So, North and South in the Indian context, they always see themselves differently. South, because especially Kerala, it's supposed to have broken off from Gondwana and joined the other, historically joined the rest of the continent. It's also seen as Dravid culture. North Indian is seen as a patriarchal, macho culture. So when Amu marries her husband, and then he tries to trade off his job with providing sexual favors for the boss, she runs away. She asserts herself all the time. And she runs away, comes with the twins to Amenem or whatever the place is. And then it's an act, even though she comes back to a Dravid, to a somewhat, society which is more friendly towards women. Still, she has her problems. And if you see baby Kochuma and if you see Amu, the differences to love are very different. Baby Kochuma falls in love with Father Mulligan, but she's happy to love him from a distance. It's more like a unholy but a religious love. She never kind of asserts that, and she's happy to let it be conditioned by society, by taboo, etc. But Amu violates that code, and she falls in love with Veluta, and she sees a lot of her childhood coming back, and she sees it as a blossoming of a real and mature relationship for a man she's known in childhood and admires. And then again, these kind of transgressions create new turbulence in a society which is not like Northern India, which is seen more as having lots of matriarchal veins, but still within the larger Indian context, you find it still has its problematics for women in society and the lower castes. So those are the two factors that are brought in.
Alina? Aldina, sorry.
Yes,
Yeah,
I was.
Aldina.
Hi, I'm Aldina, and for me, Arundhati's book was one of the. When I first read it, I was totally mesmerized with her language, use of language, and the way she looks, her perception. It was so acute. And today, even today, when I see the falling of rain, I just imagine her words across my mind, because the way she looked at everything was so beautiful, almost poetic, that it was like a masterpiece. And for me, she wove the her socialist, her social work attitude. I think her influence of her mother, because I know her mother's also shows. So the underdog and the issues of women, she brings out, especially sexuality, and I find that's her characteristic as an individual, in the sense she's always there, out there in the front. Even today, you can see her challenging the injustice, and through her writing, you can see that, the injustice to women's sexuality. I think that's, for me, comes out very strong over there. She allows her expressions of that in the whole story that she weaves. So for me, I think these were issues that nobody was talking at that time, but with her beautiful narrative, she crafts this so delicately that it's not a strange story. It's a story probably every Indian household, Indian women has, in a way, somewhere touched upon, but nobody speaks about it. So that secrecy also, I think, is woven into the book for me. Yeah, and I think that's one of her masterpieces for me. So I really, really love that book from that angle. And there are so many things that you can, every page of hers contains, I don't have the book with me right now, but every page of hers contains, and I can recall it from 23 years ago. So you can imagine how it has influenced. I know it has influenced many people's lives. She's like one of those Ayn Rands. Do you remember Fountainhead?
Yes.
How it influenced lives of people. When you read it, it remains with you. And so does Arundhati's language remain with you. The story remains with you. So reading it back again, you can read it many times over and feel every time get a new understanding of it. So for me, it was a very powerful experience reading her book. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, she has a beautiful command of language, and I think it's not only in her fiction, but also you find it also in all her work, her nonfiction, her articles, in her interviews. I think it's the way she works with language. She plays with language. The way she uses language is very unique.
Aldina, you were mentioning how influential she was to you. And last year we had with us Lucy Caldwell, who is a writer who was born in Belfast, lives in London. She was born in the 70s. And she mentioned as one of the main influences for her as a young writer, so in her early 20s, I'd say, was The God of Small Things. So Arundhati Roy has influenced readers and writers in India, but also outside India, and so it does resonate far and wide, the kind of language in the novel. As I was rereading the novel over the last few days, I was struck by that again. And the language, I think it's, as you were saying, it's an extremely sensuous language. So it's packed with the senses. So you see things, you hear them, there's smell, there's taste, there's touch. It's highly textured. And it's an embodied language. And also, of course, we're talking about sexuality. So the scenes in which you have both the scenes describing violent actions, you cannot look away from them. They're extremely violent. And at the time of Black Lives Matter, the scene in which Velutha is being killed, basically.
Yeah.
And reading it now, it was really very powerful and very affecting, because suddenly I also had all these other images on my mind's eye, and she doesn't allow us as readers to look away from that. We are forced to face the physicality of what's happening. And we can, of course, choose to say, well, this is someone who is less than human because he's an untouchable and he deserves what he's getting. Or we may not be able to look away from that because that's what she's doing. The same applies to the sexual scenes. again, so it's the sheer pleasure of skin to skin touch and of this physical closeness. And another thing that I think is interesting is the fact that the sequence between Velutha's death and Amu and Velutha's lovemaking is not chronological. First, we witness the death, but then the novel itself concludes with the lovemaking. Although it does say that there is no room for it, that's why they can only focus on the small things, because there is no place for them in society. Their relationship is doomed. But as readers, we're nevertheless looking at those barriers that Savio was talking about being broken and diluted and dissolved as they sense one another. And it's beautiful scene. I remember that. It seems to me that Arundhati Roy's use of language it's an embodied use of language, which is opposed, which contrasts with the kind of abstract language in which the laws are made. The abstract language used by Kamrat Pillai, for example. The abstract language of so the caste system, abstract, disembodied, insensitive to the realities of people, of political ideologies, religious ideologies, and her use of language is a different one. And the other thing is that she uses English, but English used alongside Malayalam. So, and when you use English, and she has the twins having a very playful engagement with language. So they're also playing with the body of words, with the phonetics of words and the meaning of words, and exploring them. And why? Because English for them is not their mother tongue. It's an acquired speech, as Stephen Dedalus puts it in the Portrait of the Young Man. And so it's a language that comes from the experience of colonialism, right? And that coexists with other languages. And so English will be very different than it is for the English, for whom it is the only language, and it's a transparent language. For in the context of India and in a sort of post-colonial context, then English is a lot more opaque and more dense, and so there's also this playfulness, curiosity, inquisitiveness that the twins bring to their engagement with language, and the narrator as well, which makes it also sort of more embodied, dense, and sensuous. So, and that was part of the challenge as a translator, but part of the joy as well. So.
There was a question I always wanted to ask you, Teresa. The novel is very much immersed in a local culture. That's not a pan-Indian culture, but it's a very southern, very Kerala culture. When translating, how did you cope with it? Like lots of expressions, for example, physical expressions of the body, expressions of language, the way the rivers flow, and the use of the words. It comes from a very rooted expression. It's marvelous that you were able to kind of connect that. What was your personal experience?
I would say that you who are familiar with Kerala and will experience and recognize far more layers in the language than a foreign reader will, which is why I find the invitation to join you here today very humbling.
No, it's for us great.
Because you will inevitably appreciate far more layers in the language than any foreigner will be able to do. And certainly than any foreigner reading it in translation will do. But what happened was, and this, when I and all the other translators were translating The God of Small Things in the late 90s. There was the internet, but it wasn't as accessible and as rich in terms of information as it is nowadays. So a lot of research involved printed dictionaries, asking people, and so on and so forth. In my case, I also had the benefit of being able to check the German translation first because it had come out first, and because I studied German, so I could, and the German translator had the privilege. This was Arundhati who told it to me later. The German translator had actually gone to India to do the translation, which was something I couldn't afford to do. But basically, and I remember that reading when the novel was shortlisted for the Booker and so on and so forth, and then something about Arundhati Roy's reaction to something that was suggested by the American publisher who wanted to have some kind of a glossary or some kind of an adaptation for some words or some passages for an American reader. And she adamantly said, no, that's out of the question.
Yeah.
And so I took that no for an answer, and I decided, okay. Quite often in the novel, the Malayalam words and so on, you can understand, you can surmise from the context what they refer to. In the few cases when you could not, the option was to insert a little bit of information, but like one word or two maximum, which is what you do in translations, into the text, as opposed to having footnotes. So that the reader would be provided with some kind of information and be able to follow it. Now, the Portuguese translation as it came out actually has some footnotes, but they were inserted by the reviser, not me, because I was, I took Arundhati Roy's no for, this is no. She doesn't want to make concessions to the Western readers, and that's fair. The reader is supposed to make the effort. Not the reverse. So, and the novel provides enough contextual hints that you can kind of sense what is going on. So even if you end up missing some layers, but that's the bonus that local readers will have.
About this novel, which is very special to me, precisely because I am a literature teacher at Carmel College for Women. My principal is also here, so it's doubly very invigorating. Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things was a text for TYBAs for quite some years, up to 2013-14. And another reason why it's very special to me is when I was in the TYBA, she won the Booker Prize, and my very close friend was working on this text for her project, and she actually got in touch with her, and her entire year she spent on, actually working on this text for her TY project. So, and that was the year she won the Booker Prize. So we were so excited that the text that we took up for the project won the Booker Prize at the end of the year. So this was something very special. So we went into the depth of this novel for quite some time, and I have actually read it several times. While teaching it every year, I would reread it and get new perspectives on it. Now this is a multi-layered text, so dense, so complex, and so many studies done on it, and so much of literature available on it. So much that I think Arundhati, after this text, decided not to write any more novels, at least for the next 2 decades. Okay, so it's very special because there's so much of complex interweaving into it. There are, you can study it from different angles, right? From Marxism, feminism, subaltern theories. You can talk about the linguistic element and the neologism. It's also seen as a semi-autobiographical text because it is so close to her life. Esther and Rahel may be twins with 18 minutes difference, but she and her brother have 18 months difference. So it's like, there is so much of closeness to her life in this. She also had done her architecture in Delhi, and she got married, she got divorced. The same, her life is spelled out through that novel, and it must be so emotional for her to write that, you know. Of course, the use of creative similes, metaphors, they are so innovative and so different from an average text. What I like about the use of language is that she can craft a sentence with a single word, sick, sweet, one word, one sentence, which is so rare among novelists. Uh, at the same time, the use of italics and it encompasses everything. It does not use a linear mode of narration.
Narration.
In the very first chapter, the whole story is over, right from the beginning to the end. And then the very first chapter actually spells out the full plot. The plot is there. And then it goes cyclic, and it rewinds and it rewinds, and it goes in flashback from different points of view, multiple points of view. The points of view are amazing. The way she experiments with the points of view, right from the child, seeing from under the coffin to that satin cloth to Veluta and Amu. Amazing, amazing. So this is one novel I have never seen any novel with the complexity of the God of Small Things. And also, I also have an interest in translation. To translate this is not everybody's cup of tea. It is really very difficult to translate a novel like this because it has got so many cultural nuances which have to be captured by the target text in the translator's point of view, which is very difficult. So I was intrigued by the fact that, ma'am, you translated this text, and as Tavia pointed out, without a glossary, it's very difficult to understand the nuances of it. And it is also translated into Malayalam, and I've got feedback of people who have translated. It may have been easier there, but it was not easy even there because this does not only use Malayalam traces; it has also Western traces from Uncle Chaco's point of view and things like that. So it's just a delectable, thing wherein God of Small Things becomes an all encompassing delight for a reader, and also for a critic and a scholar too.
Yeah, interesting aspect of the novel, which is time, and this, how time is perceived in the novel, the time of the events, and then all the cyclic, the going back to things, and so this is another very interesting aspect of this novel. Yes.
Yeah, and as you say, it's very, very multi-layered. And as I remember when Arundhati Roy came for the book launch in Portugal, and I don't know if we were chatting with the publisher and so on, and she was talking about her training as in architecture. And then she said that studying architecture had equipped her to write a novel. And it intrigued me at the time. I'm not, I have no training whatsoever in architecture, and I'm not even a very particularly visual person. But as I was rereading the novel now and being struck precisely by what you were saying now, the flashbacks and the very complex structure, I thought, well, maybe that's what she meant in terms of studying how architecture had helped her kind of fit all those points of view, and also the voice of the narrator, the flashbacks, the time, because it keeps stretching. And in a way, as you said, so we know the plot from the beginning. And then as readers, we're not so much focused on what happens, we're focused on how it happens, how it unfolds. So in a very interesting.
She also had a very special Goa connection. She was married earlier to Gerard de Cunha, who's an architect from Goa and lives in Goa, has designed a lot of the important buildings here. So she spent a lot of time in Goa. I don't know if everyone knew that, so I just thought I'll put that in. And I also love the irreverence of the novel. When growing up, maybe a little earlier than Arundhati, for us, we were taught that English was the future. So every time you spoke in your local language, you would have your knuckles beaten. So naturally, as readers of English, you developed a reverence for the English language and an irreverence for your own. So you adopted a lot of English expressions, even though they didn't belong to your country. But what Arundhati's book, with its irreverence to the written word earlier, taught you was to extol your own language, to extol your own cultural expressions. And like Aldina mentioned earlier, she described the rain the way we see it. She described, the development of plants after the rain. Like they say, they climb on electric poles, they'll climb on wires, and they're everywhere. So this was, the Indian world she gave back to the Indians. So that's probably why, you know, it was a landmark novel.
In terms of nature,
Yeah.
how nature is described, it's so rich, and it's not just visual. You kind of feel the heat and the damp and the, the texture and all that, and the names of plants and fruits, and yeah.
And also
And
the dirt and the smells as well, right? Of the river.
Yeah.
The river's always very present.
Say something?
Please do.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to give my little inputs. What I have found fascinating about the novel is, I've been to Kerala just about 2 times in my lifetime, and once in 1995, and then more recently in 2011. But I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day, somebody from Kerala and somebody not from Kerala. But the point is that we were discussing photographs about Kerala the other day, and about backwaters of Kerala. And I told them that they must read this novel because what Arundhati has managed to do, as so many of you have just now mentioned, is that she's so articulate with the language, and she's able to very graphically describe the smallest of things. So when she has been able to literally paint the picture of Kerala with all the different characters in the book. I mean, in the novel, um, and right from, I'll take small instances. Take the march, for example. When they are going to Kochi or Cochin, and when they're going in the motor car, and then they are stopped, and that communist party march happens. So, that is again a facet about Kerala, because it's been largely a communist, ruled state, communist party ruled state. So, somewhat like West Bengal, but even more so. So, you are transported to the politics of Kerala. Then she has got those wonderful characters who are Communist Party workers, and the way she has described those characters, again bringing in politics and bringing in personalities. Then going on to Chaco, who is very typically the man from Kerala, but very English in his
Anglophile.
manners,
Yeah.
because of his education in England, and his stay in England, or having married an English woman. So that aspect comes through. And of course, then going down to the twins and Veluta and Amu, and the way she's built up the characters, and I found it very, very fascinating. And literally, it's like a to me, to put it simply, it was like a film, unfolding scene by scene. Uh, Literally. And if you see all the chapters, whatever number they are, I have it right here. 1 second. Yeah, there were 21 chapters, but literally I would say they are like 21 different large scenes. And the other fascinating point that I found is her ability to go from present tense to past tense, and back and forth with great ease. And the way if after completing the novel, I was going back today to some of the early chapters, and then the way she has connected chapter 1 to the penultimate chapter, the words also, or paragraphs, and she's connected that, and that's quite fascinating. So this is my immediate take, and I would request others to speak who have been quiet so far, Suresh, who's from Kerala, and then Norbert. Please speak.
It was quite interesting because she said that she was an architect, and as Teresa also said that the architect part of it comes into the novel. I was reminded of the time when I was reading about Thomas Hardy, also an architect who turned into a novelist. And his technique was to build up from the foundation up, and the entire facade and the cathedral comes out at the end. Whereas, as Dennis correctly said, this one, she in the first chapter, she has given her the whole building. And then she goes in to tell you what are the pillars and where the foundation made. And that it's a beautiful technique which really gets you right from the beginning. Since you've got the entire the shape of what is to come is already there in your mind, and then you move into the details. It's a beautiful way of approaching a story. And the other point about her storytelling technique, I don't know how many of you remember the incident where she watches of course not the Kathakali dance. She says that the art of storytelling of the Kathakali dancer is unique. I've got it on page 229, 230. It's a bit long to read, but I like the way she brings out how the Kathakali dancer brings out the stories of the Mahabharata. And as you come to the end of that description of his storytelling technique, you find that actually she's talking about her own technique. It is her own technique that she's describing through the art of the Kathakali dancer. It's beautiful. I've got it open if you like, but I don't think I should waste your time reading that paragraph. It's worth going back to that to see how she actually is bringing out her own style through the style of the Kathakali dancer.
That's a very interesting point, yes.
Rahul, can I talk? Margarita?
Yeah,
Please.
Yeah. So I was really impressed by this book because I've heard, this is the first book of Arundhati Roy that I have read. I've heard some of her interviews, and I was always very intrigued by her expression, her language. She has really an awesome command of the English language. And particularly her description of all the details are really so well put, like describing all the details of a Keralite home, the typical Keralite village, their clothes, and she goes into these senses, the smell of everything, the touch, as she touches caste, she touches sensuality, sexuality. Then the children, what I didn't feel it was so incestuous because they were all the time craving for love. Right from the time they were small, they were craving for love. They felt their father had rejected them. Even that picture, that they had with the father, they sort of treasured that picture. But still the mother put it off, saying, no, he didn't really want to carry you. I forced him to carry you. When they craved for their mother's attention, all the time, Rahel kept saying her mother loved her a little less. So, I mean, they were craving for their mother's attention all the time. And I think, it was, I just read out one part. While other children of their age learned other things, Esther and Rahel learned how history negotiates its terms, collects its dues from those who break its laws. And they had broken the law because they had taken Sophie Moll and she died. And the mother and Velutha, both the people who they loved, had again broken the law, and then both of them were punished. And there was so much of, hurt in their lives that the only way they could recover from it was to be together. So I didn't really feel it was incestuous. I just felt that they wanted that feeling of touch. And that's what Arundhati Roy has put together in that brother and sisterly love. Also, Ammu and Chaco, like, every time they used to quarrel, and once in the car when they sort of okay with each other, immediately the children, like, they warmed up to it. Veluta was the only one who actually showed them affection and was good to them always, right? From making those little whistles, taking them, teaching them to swim, teaching them to go in the backwaters, repairing the boat, all little acts of kindness. They didn't get it from their grandmother. They didn't get it from the grand aunt. They didn't get it from Chaco. The mother was always partly for them and partly not. She was correcting them. So I feel that the only way they sort of recovered from that was to be together. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting view too. So it's more about healing than necessarily about transgression. Yes. Yeah. Any other comments?
Can I say something?
Sure, please.
Yeah. Okay. So I completely agree with what I'm really sorry. I don't know the person who spoke before me, but I agree with a lot of the. Yes, Preeti. So I agree with what you said about.
Please introduce yourself because.
Okay, my name is Gauravi. I think this is my second meeting with the group, but this is the first time I am talking. I was a professor at Chogle College, but currently I've taken a break to do a full-time PhD. So I'm just freelancing as of now and joining a lot of book club meetings. So yeah, I agree with what Preeti said. I think Veluta is the god of small things in question here, because sometimes whilst we are reading the book, we tend to forget that it is more about him than three of them that you don't find between anybody else in the book. I too did not find the relationship incestuous at all. In fact, towards the end, till my professor mentioned it in class, where I was a TY student when I picked up the book. So until the point that my professor mentioned this view in class that, you could look at it as an incest, up till that point I didn't really think of it like that, because throughout the book you see all of these relationships that are failing, and then at the end of it you come back to Rahel and Esther, and that sort of gives you hope. So I think it's like a very necessary positive ending or a feel good ending that should have been there, because you see every other relationship in the book that is incomplete, or some words that should have been said are not being said at the right time, or they're just left in the air. So that's I think it's a very natural ending to a story that starts with these two. Another thing that I would like to say about the language is that the first time I picked up this book, I picked it up at Confidant, the rental library, and I think I must have been in like the 8th or 9th standard, 14 years old maybe. And I couldn't complete the book. So I closed it like after 20 or 25 pages. I just could not move ahead after that. The next time I picked it up was during my third year of BA at Chogle. And, it was part of the syllabus. And I thought, oh my God, this book, I stopped reading it and now I must, because it's in the syllabus. But when I read it at that point in time, I fell in love with the book so much that I read it like 3 or 4 times. And then when I moved to Bangalore to complete my master's, I met a group of Malayali friends. So I picked up phrases from the book, like, a Chaco-shaped hole in the universe. And there were a couple of other phrases like this. And I annoyed them for 2 years with it so badly that they actually labeled me the god of small things girl by the end of 2 years. So this connection that I have with the book, very strangely, I could not complete her second book too. Like I picked it up last year and then I stopped it after 100 pages. So I'm hoping that the next time I pick up, I fall in love with that book too. So this is one thing that is, okay. Another thing I thought about the book is that, this book was the first one that I felt was a little familiar with Indian English, and after reading this, the other diasporic books that I've picked up, maybe it's because this book has influenced me a lot, but I find a lot of imitative content in those books. I may be wrong. Okay, for example, when I read Sham Selvadurai's Funny Boy, I don't know how many of you all have read that book, but every page that I read from that book, it takes me back to Roy's style of writing. So that's the kind of she like sort of influences your mind so strongly that it refuses to leave your mind space completely. And I'll end by saying one last thing. The most beautiful thing about her writing, I think, from the book that I liked is the words that she uses in italics, uh, things that the kids repeat to themselves, like Amu love me a little less, okay, or the lemon drink orange drink man, and they are repeated in your mind like how a child would say it. So I had this neighbor as a child and I never knew his name. I called him the man with the long hair. In Konkani, I called him Lamele Kesacho. So I throughout my childhood I knew him as Lamele Kesacho, and I never found out his name, and even years after his death I don't know what his name is today. So I still think of him that way. It reminds me of the lemon drink orange drink man or many other phrases that she's written from the point of view of the kids in the book. So yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. And also along with what you just said, if I can just say something, how the words, how they flip them backwards and forwards, and they play with them and they mix them. It's also it's children's things, and she does that very well as well.
And it's also part because she does make the point, or the novel makes the point, that you need to carry something from your childhood into adulthood, otherwise you end up having a very sterile adulthood.
Yeah.
And so it's this playfulness, this curiosity, and that is imbued in her use of language, which again contrasts with a very kind of sterile and strictly repetitive use of language that those who speak in the name of the law make, because when they just repeat the words of the law, they're not even questioning it. They're not wondering what on earth does it mean, what sort of implications does it have, etc., etc. And that seems to be a purely adult way of engaging with language, with life, with social codes, because language is also about codes, right? And throughout the novel, there seems to be this point that you need to carry something from your childhood into your adulthood. Actually, that is also part of the description of Veluta when Amo and Veluta are together, that the different ages are present.
Most of the things have been already covered by a lot of people, but I was just waiting because this book has been, like I was telling Savya the other day, it has been a revolution and a revelation. And it is a book that has introduced me to pain, the concept of pain, and how to, with every page, there is poetry. It's poetry in prose. So you open any page and you can just continue from there, and you can get so much from this one page. And it's just the story, like I think Glenn has said, that it is revealed in the first chapter itself, and then you're building and going back and forth, but it's never jarring. So you look forward to that, and you immediately switch, or you are able to seamlessly go into what the next chapter is about, and you don't even remember that this is somehow going to be connected later, and then it just kind of falls into place at the end of it. For me, like I was saying, the introduction of pain, so there are so many instances where it's so difficult to read, but you cannot stop, like Maria was saying, Teresa was saying, you cannot stop. And everything that she talks about, she associates with smell and touch. So the sentence that remains is the smell of roses in the air, the smell of iron. um, when a man is crushed, it smells like this. So if you would, like, if I have to describe, like, from there, this concept of, okay, if I'm having a bad day, then I'm going to describe it as i'm feeling I'm feeling red inside today. This is how I feel, like, it's like I can associate with the color, and this is how I learned to kind of go beyond words and bring in emotions and senses and feelings, and this is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling like there are ants inside me and they are crawling up me and they are eating into my heart. And these are the things that I got from the book that I could eventually use into my language. So this book for me, it's like every time, nobody even has to say anything about the book. You just start talking and you're like, god of small things, right? And you're like, yeah, right, right? And that's it. That's the whole, everything comes into that one sentence, because there is so much spoken about the book, and for all the right reasons, and for it deserves everything that it has been given. So pain, because that made a lot of influence, had a lot of influence on me. The kind of things, the way she describes it, you've heard of these incidents, every day you hear about transgressions and lower caste and upper caste and all these fights that are happening. But the way that she connects it with soul to soul connection, and then what is the price that you have to pay for that in a country that does not respect love, women, human beings, these kind of things. So even a small incident like, the father, where he cuts her gumboots, if anyone remembers, and on the outside he's this big, personality, but at home he is terrorizing his own family, and everybody, what do you call it, hail him for being a great person, whereas he's not. So all that pain that Amu has gone through her childhood, where she can clearly see that her mother is making there is a difference between the way that she treats her brother and herself, and then it falls further when she marries outside of her community and then comes back with divorced. So she does not have any standing in society, and that kind of it goes on to it passes on to her children as well, and they are left to their own devices many times, and then they, whatever they do. So all the pain that they're going through, and in all this, when uh, the only person that you would probably think is without any malice, without any ulterior motive, let's say, is Velutha, and he's the one who pays the price with his life. And then the transgressions that happen with these four people, they all kind of pay the price for that. So the pain really got to me, and I feel that, if people have gone through a little bit of pain in their life, this novel really will strike them a lot more, because of what, like, emotions it basically stirs in you. It's very unsettling, but it's also very cathartic at some level. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yes. This huge violence, but also huge tenderness. So you have the two extremes there. And as you were mentioning, a lot of the violence is directed at the untouchables, women and children. So the most vulnerable ones and the ones who lack a standing, and the ones that other people feel they have power over, and can thus inflict this violence. And it is described in a very relentless manner that you cannot really flinch away from. Yeah.
Even after Sophie Mole dies, for example, the mother, she keeps slapping Esther that any chance she gets, it's said in the book, which is such a, it's such a disturbing thing to even think about. Small children of 7 or 9, they're being treated to this, and they're being told constantly that no one loves you, or, you have done this and it's because of you that it has happened. The kind of influence that it will have through their life, which they carry, because Esther finally turns silent. There's a very nice sentence that describes Esther. He acquired very little space in the world. He went into himself. So it just, what the shriveling of, personalities. But Rahel, on the other hand, is wild and whatever. But anytime they say that she's close to her husband or they're having some intimate moment, her eyes are always somewhere else, and she's always vacant in her eyes and looking for, that love that she only had in her childhood with her twin, and it's now lost, and she cannot find it anywhere, because there was no closure basically, or there was no. It's very difficult to think about it.
The kind of warmth and love she probably also had with Veluta. It's an unconditional love, and there are certain things that Arundhati Roy has created. Like, for example, You know, when Sophie Mall is seen at the airport and everyone is geared towards Sophie Mall's movement, you know. And as a girl who's also deprived of love, Rahel cannot take it. So when everyone is talking about Sophie Mall and then there's a small reference to Rahel, she curls herself up into the curtain because she's suddenly looking for that attention. And I don't know, but I'd like to say this. I feel that Rahel as a child and Amu as an adult, they are both flaneurs in the novel. They are mapping the social consciousness of the state. You know, reactions towards divorce, reaction towards children, towards the other castes, towards the whole Anglophile attitude, which is very well brought out in Chaco. Reactions to skin color, you know, reactions to caste. And this is a little shocking because it comes from the world's first democratically elected communist state. And you see the layers within that society. You see that, you know, the caste element still persists, though it is Comrade Pillai, but Comrade Pillai himself is very casteist to the core. And he's so middle class in his sentiments that if you knew what communism was, you would not brand him a communist. He's showing Rahel the photographs of his son Lenin settled in Delhi, you know, catering to the embassies. And he says, look, he's got a child, he's got a wife, and he's got a scooter. And then Rahel thinks, you know, he probably, you know, is talking to me like, you know, he's showing all his acquisitions. He probably has a new fridge too. So, you know, those little things, that is what I mean by she creates a lot of irreverence in her book. Accepted ideas and notions that we had, you know, like everyone said, oh, India, world's first democratically elected communist state. But you look at underneath, there are, like Teresa has rightly said, other textures, other layers, and it just opens up like an onion, you know, skin on skin, skin on skin. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Architectural metaphor, it's a house with so many windows that you, yeah, and so many, yes. And also how all that very, very complex heritage that comes from, you know, all the traditions within India itself, all the different religions and languages within India, as well as all the layer of colonialisms, and how insidious all that is, how internalized by the characters that is, without their being aware of it. So, as we're saying, some characters, usually the most dispossessed ones, will be aware of it because they lack the privileges that come with power. And precisely because they lack those privileges and they lack that power, they are aware of what power can do and how it can be used. And that's why they will point out to all those incongruences, including on the part of the members of the Communist Party and then the capitalist tastes and you know, all those contradictions, yes. So perhaps more contributions?
Can I ask you a question, Teresa?
Please.
I wanted to ask you a question. As you must have noticed that she talks about caste system among the Catholics also, isn't it? You must have seen that. What is your reaction to that as a European to caste system among the Catholics, the Christians?
I suppose I should learn that from you because it's probably a combination of Catholicism and then the caste system that is Hindu and that.
But it's interesting to know because
Catholicism is itself a very hierarchical religion, right? So.
No, but as Christians, we are not supposed to have.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying something.
No, it's just saying that Catholicism is hierarchical in its. The Catholic Church is hierarchical in its structure.
Yeah.
Within the institution itself.
But no, what I'm trying to point out is Catholics as a community, both in Goa and Kerala, have their own caste system which existed before the conversions. And it's more interesting to know that while Goans had our conversions maybe in the 16th century, the Syrian Catholics go back to the 1st century AD. And they have maintained their caste system right from those days. That's the interesting part. Because Syrian Christians were supposed to be converts of St. Thomas, one of the apostles who came down to India. And the wonder of it is that the caste has been maintained all these centuries. So I just wanted to know what is your reaction to that as a, what, I don't know whether you're a Catholic or a Christian or whatever, plus a European. It's a different perspective altogether.
Yeah, well, here you can't talk about the caste system itself, but you can talk about social classes. But in the novel, yes, you certainly have David Kochama, for example, sort of completely endorsing the caste system to the extent that Veluta shouldn't be condoned with and would be an untouchable and so on and so forth. And so smell differently. So all the prejudices have been internalized by her. But then there are also references to the inbreeding amongst the Syrian Catholics, isn't it? So there are also some references there about the self-preservation instinct of a certain group and the consequences that it might lead to when you consider that marrying outside of the tribe is problematic. So I suppose in that regard, I certainly would have a lot more to learn from you because you are much more familiar with the whole situation than I am. And it goes to show that you're not only a Catholic or only this or only that, but each person has internalized the mixture of influences that come from different sources, just as Chaco, for example, he's also educated in Oxbridge, but at the same time, he's a socialist and communist anyway. And so he also has many contradictions within him. And as a man, he also has interesting views about women. For example, he appreciates that Margaret Kochama, that she doesn't do things for him, that she isn't dependent on him, and so on and so forth. But then when he is back after he divorces, he keeps this door open to satisfy his men's needs and so on and so forth. So there are all sorts of contradictions within each character. But I'm sure other people will have a lot more better informed about Stanley's question and contribute more insightfully to it than I can.
Within 1 minute?
Please.
Yeah. So I think, as far as I know, when there were many other alternative practices and religions and social customs that came into India, and there was a huge appeal to it because people thought that we are going to get rid of the caste system. That's one of the largest systems of oppression right now, even today, sadly. So while that may have looked like we are going to get rid of it, it didn't really happen, because obviously the people in power are not going to let go of the power that easily. So I think the reason she mentions it in the book, I think, is to bring this, like sort of throw this fact in our faces that that's not the case. You're looking at a communist society that's supposedly going to be rid of all these power structures, but that's not happening. And why is it not happening? There are other oppressing forces present. It may not exactly be caste, but it may be in the form of gender bias, it may be in the form of class bias. So it's going to be replaced by something else, but there are going to be other factors that people are going to try and speak against. So I think, yeah, you can look at it that way.
Actually, I wasn't looking at the oppressive part of the caste system. I just wanted to know a European's reaction to the fact that there is a caste system existing among a group that is not supposed to have castes. Okay, I think let's close that. I think Norbert wanted to say something.
I'm Norbert. Okay, I look at myself as a reader. Okay, I also try, as far as whenever I take up a book, not to look into too much of the background, not to study reviews, not to look at reviews, but to let the book speak to me. And this book has been wonderful. It touches at so many levels. I've heard about Arundhati Roy earlier. I read the book 20 years earlier, and I've been a kind of a fan of Arundhati Roy. But here in this book, I've seen so many elements, and I like the way in which she takes up these elements. For instance, the thing that fascinated me, that even in this book, she deals with how a normal Malayali is also introduced to other religions, like the Kathakali aspect of it. I think that was fantastic, the way the whole story of the book is woven into that Kathakali aspect. But it's also a painful book. It's a painful book, and especially when it comes to Veluta and you feel for him. And one of the passages that struck me very much, if you let me read it, it'll just take me 2 minutes. The inspector asked his question. Esther's mouth said yes. Childhood tiptoed out. Silence slid in like a bolt. Someone switched off the light and Veluta disappeared. So when I read a book like this, it's not so much what the author intended to tell, but what I understood from the book. And my understanding of a book is what I do after I read a book. It's like my own interest now maybe would be in the political compulsions of Kerala.
Thing on that, I also, and going along with what Gauravi and Rujuta have also said, I have also experienced the novel, how it speaks to me throughout the years. I first read it in '99, and as I change and go through different experiences, there are different aspects of the novel that also I relate to in different ways. When, I can think about childhood, things that I experienced in my childhood, or things I did with my brother as well, not incestuous. Or as a mother, ever since when I first read it, I didn't have children, and now I'm a mother of two twins as well, teenage boys. So how I can relate to Amu and her relationship with the children and the things she says. And in fact, there are quotes, parts of the novel of things that she has said to her children that sometimes if I'm talking to my own sons, they come to my head, like even this, if you say careless things to people, they will love you a little less. This is something that is when I'm telling them off, if they've done something wrong, if they speak, this is something that as a mother I can relate to. Or there's something else she says at one point, which I like a lot as well. At her father's funeral, I think, she talks about her own mother and why her mother was crying, that she wasn't because she loved him, but it's just that she had gotten used to him. So there are lots of, as Norbert was saying, I'm also interested, and this is a relationship that I've had with this book, is how it's spoken to me along the years, and with as my life changes and as I have experienced different aspects of my life as well. So I don't know if anybody else feels this as well.
In fact, so many things that are written in the novel about relationships have happened to Indians, as a tribe. Like, for example, the father, Papachi, is hitting the mother and Amu, and they both run and hide in the hedge. Then Amu comes to retrieve her gumboots, and the father sees her, hits her, and then shreds the gumboots. It's a quiet violence which leaves a lot of scars. I mean, I can see several anecdotes of that happening in my relationship with my father. So, she's got the pulse of the nation, pulse of the Indian, which and so beautifully captured. I mean, the relationship between Papachi and um, Mamachi, I think, the mother, is so interesting because she plays the violin and then his moth is not recognized. And when she sets up the factory, everyone is relating to her and he's retired wearing his beautiful tweed suits, but nobody is looking at him. He has this big notes, he sits in a big nose, he sits in his armchair in the library, but he is treated as a man apart. But she's dealing with the active buzz of everyday life. And he doesn't take nicely to that. And it introduces a new kind of acrimony in their relationship. It's clearly a destabilization of power. So you see that in so many Asian families, Indian families. And then you are taught at the same time that the family is a continuous unit. So it has to continue because there are children. And then the relationship between Chaco and his father. Chaco is an Anglophile. He thinks his thinking is communist, but there are so many things within his own personality that are uncommunist. The way he defends, the thing in the factory, his relationship to the women in the factory. And then at the same time, to defend Mamachi, he twists his father's arm, and the father responds by breaking the armchair, which, he takes out the violence on the armchair. And that resonates with how he would have liked to, treat his wife. I mean, I'll smash the bottle on your head, which could be in other relationships. And at the same time, Amu, as a flaneur in the novel, makes some interesting comments, or it is Rahel who makes it. He says, the factory belonged to him. What was his also belonged to him. And what was Ammu's also belonged to him. Because Ammu, though she works in the novel, her presence as an entity, as an equal partner, because they're brothers and sisters, is never realized. It's the whole thing of property sharing within Indian families. I can note on that because as Goans, we have equal rights, coming from Portuguese law. But Indians, their laws coming from Manu, you don't have equal rights. Men take the share, women gets a little dowry and bidai hoti hai uski, she's waved off from the house. So it's at so many levels, there are so many interesting things that she uh, brings out.
Hello. I, I, I am a student of history and literature. What my personal take of this novel is that it's a very kind of unconventional writing. It's unconventional writing, and it's by an unconventional writer. And you do not expect a kind of a stream of water to flow through the story. It's something which suddenly, you don't expect things to happen as you expect in other stories. Suddenly, you find the scene of the masturbation in a picture theater. And you suddenly find that scene and you are repulsed by it, and you try to, like all the others said, you try to see the fact that Arundhati Roy is also having the mind of a social activist. And the fact that she's a social activist, she tries to penetrate into the societal ills, whether they are of the caste, or how the Syrian Catholic bishops try to take donations, and how the Communist Party, in fact, is supposed to preach one thing, and communism has not really made a change in the whole scene in Kerala. So she keeps time and again weaving societal evils into her story. And that's also, one must understand that her mother was the first Syrian Catholic to fight for rights for women as far as property is concerned. And Arundhati Roy is what I call a very gutsy person by nature. So when she wrote this novel, it was, as a young girl living a kind of a bohemian lifestyle, a very unconventional lifestyle. But as she rightly says, as an architect, she wove every word, she wove every idea as an architect lays bricks by bricks to make a wall. So that clearly comes through. As a writer, she has, everybody talks about the pain element, but I believe that when she wrote, she also experienced pain herself to write what she wrote in a very frank and free manner. So this is what is my take on the book. And today, of course, Arundhati Roy has proven herself to be involved in societal problems as an anti-establishment person. But this novel has the beginnings of that, where she throws society on the face and she makes the reader read and laugh at what is happening in society. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you very much, Sushila. So, yeah, I suppose we will all feel that a lot of what became of Arundhati Roy's also public intervention and her activism. There are many signs of that already in the novel, the commitment also to nature, to preservation, and so on and so forth, to the hypocrisies of the whole power system. There's a lot of that, as you say, that's kind of come to the fore in the novel, and that she has then chosen to articulate in other venues and in other ways through her essay writing and her activism. Yes, but and rereading the novel now in full knowledge and in full awareness of her trajectory, we become all the more sensitive to all those signs that are already there in the novel. Yeah. So maybe would anybody else like to?
Teresa and Margarita. I'll say that because Teresa will be speaking and then leaving. And Rahul for handling everything so well, and all our precious members for this lovely input. It's been a lovely evening, and especially our hosts. I think Margarita and Teresa for hosting this particular session. It became all so much more interesting and engaging because of their presence. We're sorry that Arundhati could not make it. Please,
Yes.
over to you, Teresa.
Well, I thank you. So, Savia, thank you so very much for the invitation, and Raul for all the assistance, and every single participant for your insights, for your contributions. But it's been, well, as I said, an honor to be part of this. Very humbling also to be invited and to have this wonderful excuse to go back to the novel, to encounter it afresh and anew, to see things, as Margarita was saying, each time we read a text, we're going to respond differently because we are different people. Different things have happened in our lives. So we'll be responding to different aspects, spotting things that we have not fully noticed before and so on. So it's been, that experience of rereading has been very rewarding. But this experience of listening to you and participating in this discussion has also been a huge pleasure and honor. So thank you very, very much for having me and for having us. And it's also a pleasure to do it with Margarita. So thank you, Margarita, to carry on the conversation. Look forward to listening to the rest of the discussions after my college meeting, which will certainly be much less interesting than this one. Thank you so much. And very good to see you again, Savia.
Yeah, lovely.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Teresa. Thank you.
Yes, Margarita, tell us about your engagement with the novel, and then maybe before we wind up, we'll get into smaller discussions.
I first got acquainted with the novel in 1999, I think. It was recommended by a friend, and actually, the copy that I have is still his copy. I kept it, and I read it in one take, and I was very impressed by the book. And right at the beginning, um, I can't remember exactly who it was. If it was Aldina, um, talked about the impact that the impression that the book causes on us, and I had that. I was very impressed by many different episodes in the book, like the orange drink, lemon drink man episode that everybody for sure was impressed by, of Velutha's beating and killing, the involvement of the twins, and Amu's troubled life. So these were episodes that, you know, they stayed with me throughout every time I think of the book. And I have very visual, because of her descriptions, I have very visual images of these episodes in my mind. And they were, you know, it's what we have been discussing. They were both troubling and beautiful. The way the language she uses, the depth of detail and sensory language that she uses, but at the same time very troubling. And this is a book that I have, as most of you, this is a book that has accompanied me throughout these past, how many, 20 years. And although I did try to look for more like it, you know, I tried reading different, even before my academic path, tried reading different Indian writers who were writing in English, or book prize winners. And although I read many wonderful writers, with very powerful narratives, I think none had the impact that Roy and this book had on me. So, you know, motivated by her book, and also by the admiration that I had for the author herself, because I followed a bit her articles, her interviews, I decided to do a PhD. And one thing that I knew for sure is that it had to have, The God of Small Things had to be a book that I was going to work on in my PhD, and I did. However, along with my supervisor, we thought that maybe one book wasn't enough for a PhD thesis, so I also included Kieran Desai's The Inheritance of Loss. So these are two books that I worked on for my PhD. And am I taking too long? No? Okay. I don't want to get too much into it because it's, you know, academic and very theoretical, but I can briefly summarize what I did in my thesis, very briefly. Just like what I did was I used these two novels, The God of Small Things and The Inheritance of Loss. So they were both, you know, Booker Prize winning novels, female Indian writers, to support this theory that I had, that these works of fiction are going to be very long, okay? Because it's what I did was this. As I said, it's very theoretical and very bit philosophical in a way, you know, because I had this idea that these books had this role, three-dimensional role. So they are historical documents, ethnographies, and works of art. My first degree was in social anthropology, and then I moved on to literature. So this was a chance also to do a little bit of field work through the narrative, as I say. And so through using these two books, me in my thesis and my theory was that people were able to develop an idea of how history can be constructed or deconstructed or rewritten, and how stories stories help to piece together a more thorough and detailed understanding of a nation, a culture, its history and people, and also how literary aesthetics are developed, so looking into kind of imperial history, decolonization, post-colonial theory. So that was what my thesis was about. What else can I say? So much that has been said in this discussion here is so interesting, and it makes me want to go back to researching on this book, because I haven't I haven't done any since I got my PhD in 2016, at the end of November 2016, and since then I haven't really gone back to the book. So it gave me a chance to pick it up again and to listen to different perspectives, and also perspective from India. So, it's not just from here, us foreign academics, giving a view of the readings of the book. And on Roy, author and activist, I'm a big admirer of Roy. I think she has very strong magnetism and very charismatic personality. Her work of how she uses languages, as we mentioned, and I'm fascinated by her capacity to speak out so courageously on so many different topics. And even in her works of fiction, she's able to, she has, her plot, like the train ride, but there's so much going on there, and how she works all these different ideas into different beliefs and different ideas that she has on capitalism, human rights, globalization, I don't know, caste, pollution, war. And this is something that I really admire in the author. I don't know. I think that's all I have to say on the book and on this session. I just want to say thank you to all of you, and Savia, who's not here anymore, and Teresa. And it was a real pleasure for me to be here and to be able to share ideas with you and listen to your opinions, and hopefully we can keep rereading and reinterpreting the book in the light of circumstances and our own experiences. And that's it.
First observation, in terms of the story, everybody has said such wonderful things about the book, and I always make a comment by a question, and my question is this book an entertainment or is it revelation? As a society, how should we look at it? In terms of a story, we who live in India, we see a million stories with pain, and such stories are there, and we all feel them each and every day. So when writers like this, I know Arundhati Roy is an activist, we all know her so very much, but what do we get out of this storytelling? Have we seen any impact in society? This is because so many academics are there on the panel today.
A very, very pertinent question. Once an author writes a book, she washes her hands off, his or her hands off from the book. It is in the custody of the reader. So you take the book the way you want it. You think it's entertainment for you? Chew it, digest it, relish it, cherish it. If you are a critic, you critique it. You are a scholar, you study it. So the recipient takes the book the way he or she finds it. The author washes her or his hands off after the book is written. It's in the public domain, right? So what the question is answered by you. The question has to be answered by you as a reader. Yeah, that's why we are having this discussion, because the perspectives differ from each.
Also needs to go. I think we all agree to conclude now that we've had a very good session. And I think, well, on behalf of everyone else, thank everyone for taking part with so much enthusiasm. And as for me, I'm going to do a reread of the novel, because it is such an exciting novel. So thank you, everyone, and Margarita especially for joining us all the way from Portugal.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank
bye,
you so
everyone.
much. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Good
Thank
night,
you
everyone.
very, very much.
Good night and good evening.